One Will Focus.
Thank you guys for joining me for an Adobe Illustrator tutorial. This is the One Will Focus. You guys can check me out on all social media at the One Will Focus or on my website, theonewillfocus.com. I will have the link and information at the bottom of the screen if you ever want to check out any of my work. I like to update things on Instagram with drawings and different, new artwork coming out. So check me out there, follow me, and, engage with me if you want. You can talk to me. I always respond back, and I try to respond as soon as possible. Okay? So, anyway, what we're going to learn today is the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator. It's a very simple tool, but it is my favorite tool, which is probably why I always love to teach how to utilize this tool. A lot of people who work in Adobe Illustrator, they don't necessarily use the pen tool in the way that I'm going to be teaching it, but there are people who actually live and die by the pen tool. I believe that the pen tool is the most accurate tool in Adobe Illustrator's arsenal. However, a lot of people use some of the other drawing tools, which are the pencil tool, the brush tool, and the blob brush tool, all which have different unique properties. The closest related one to the pen tool would be the pencil tool, but the pen tool provides a level of accuracy that you cannot get from the other tools because it literally is following everything that you do precisely. You can control all curves, all turns, any angles. Everything is controlled by where you place your pen, where you change your anchor points to. If you convert it from an anchor point to a curve or curve to an anchor point, you have complete control over the actual fluidity of your line, which to me is the most important thing. That's how I believe you get a high level of accuracy in these actual programs. Now, one of the things you will learn, and I'm going to jump into this soon and show you some work directly on the artboard, but one of the things you do learn is that in drawing, a lot of people like for their drawings to look organic, and a lot of that has to deal with how the lines look in your drawing. If your lines are too, I don't want to say, if they're not too geometric, but if there's too much consistency in the weight of your line, there's no variation in terms of the pressure in one area or darkness or lightness, thickness, stroke weight, then it starts to look static. If your lines are too static, people are going to look at it as if your piece is less original in terms of the fluidity of it or the flow or the rhythm of the piece, and it will just look more computer generated and more generic. So you have to also learn how to uh, develop lines that convince people that this is drawn by hand. That's typically what you want to go with. Uh, Using the pen tool, and this is how we're going to start, it is the if you're in a single column layout, it's the fifth icon down. I like the single column because it gives me more screen space, screen real estate to work with. And I have a strange layout. Most people's layout is actually on the right hand side, mine is on the left. And that's only because I'm using a companion from Wacom. And the way it's set up, because of how my hands are and my screen, I need this on the left hand side. So I set everything that I do on the left as opposed to the right. So don't worry if this looks a little different than what you may normally see. It just means that I moved mine over to the left hand side. Okay, so we're going to select the pen tool. We're going to make sure we have a black stroke. We're actually going to remove the fill, and you can actually change between your fill and your stroke by hitting the X key on your keyboard, and that'll allow you to switch which one you're actually working with currently. And then to get rid of it, we'll hit the backslash button, which is by your question mark on your keyboard. So we'll get rid of the actual fill, and we just want to work with the stroke. So now we have our black stroke with no fill. So we're going to place a dot on the board. Whenever you place a dot on the board or you press the key, your mouse or your touchpad or your tablet pen down, you're placing a point, and that's an anchor point. Now, the distance between 2 points is a line. You have to think of everything in Adobe Illustrator as geometry. So now you have a line. So you have an object that goes from point A to point B. All right. And now you can keep clicking and you will continue to make points. And you can actually close this shape off if you bring everything back to the original point that you made. And as you see, the pen icon will go from just the pen icon to one with a circle, which means you're closing the path. This is a path. The stroke that you're making is called a path. The individual points that change direction are called anchor points because they are anchored in that specific position, which means that any angle you go to from there will be completely resultant upon that one anchor point. Now, that's fine. You can make straight lines and various anchor points, but what if you want a curved line? Well, there are these things called Bezier curves, Bezier curves. So you would click a point, and then instead of just clicking down on the next point, you can click and you can drag out. And what you'll see are these two lines that extend from your middle anchor point here, and these are called handles. And if you let go, you'll notice that it curves. That curve is called a Bezier curve. Now, if you were to click and do the same thing again, you'll notice that even just by clicking, it automatically arcs. And the reason it does that is because it does it dependent upon the actual handle that is projected from the right side or the last side of your actual last anchor point. So it will result in a curve that tangents away from that actual line. Okay? Now we can continue to draw straight lines. If we want another curve, we can do the same thing we did before. We click and then we pull. And you'll notice these curves are going to be relatively even in terms of incidence and refraction. So the way that it's coming in to the point will be the same way that it goes out of the point. And the reason it's doing that is because these handles are identical in length. So let's say we were to click and pull, but we don't want these handles to necessarily be the same length. You can then hold down the Alt key, and then you can pull this handle back in, and then it'll bring a smaller handle out from the initial handle that you had coming from your previous point. So now when you make a point, you'll see that the curve is much smaller. And we'll zoom in just so we can take a better look. You see the distance and the difference between this curve compared to this curve? See how this arcs out further, and this one is more of a sharp curve. And the reason this is because it has a shorter handle that's governing the distance in which it's going to turn. So let's say we pull like this, but then we want this resulting curve to be even different. So we can lengthen this one, and when we pull out here, you'll notice this curve is greater. It's all depending on the length of the handle that you use to pull out. So you remember, you place a point, you drag so you can see the handle, and then you hit the Alt key to change the length of the handle. Now, it doesn't also always just change the length. You can change the direction, which will give you an angle as opposed to a simple curve. So let's say we change this to a right angle, and we were to then click another point. Now we have a sharp angle off of that curve. Now we can also click and drag the handle out. Let's give a right angle, but we can also click to pull another curve. And then that curve will make sure that it only comes out and or changes from its course depending upon how that handle is angled as well. So the curves, the lines, the points that you're going to give are all going to be dependent upon the handles of the anchor points. So if you place one point without pulling it, it's going to be an anchor point. If you place multiple points, let's say you pull the handles like this, then you're going to get Bezier curves. And these curves are going to be solely dependent upon the length of the handle that came before the curve. All right, very easy to understand, very easy concept. Now, one of the things you're going to find that may become an issue is the actual level of precision that you're going to need when placing down an anchor point. Let's say you have a drawing, and here's what I'll do. I'll actually give you an example. Let's go into our work folder, let's go into sketches, and I will scroll, and I'm going to pick a piece. Let's just pick this one. Let's place it in here. And now that we have this piece, it's automatically going to be placed in layer 1 because we didn't have anything on that layer. We are going to get our selection tool, which is V on the keyboard, and we're going to make sure the art piece is selected, and we are going to align to the middle of the artboard just to make sure that it's centered, so that way we don't have to do anything funny with it later. We're going to lock the layer that is in our layers panel with this artwork on it, and we're going to create a new layer, and then we are going to select our pen tool again, which is the letter P on your keyboard. Now, when you are using the pen tool, one of the problems you may run into, which is what I was going to explain earlier, is that sometimes you'll want to place a point on a precise location, but you may miss that point when you press it down. Sometimes you'll have to, or you'll find yourself deleting that point, starting over, still missing. Like, I want to place it right here on the junction of her crown and her hair. And so you don't want to keep doing that. The best option at that point, or what to do, is to, once you've clicked, you can hit the space button, hold it down, and then it'll allow you to drag that point to the location that you want. And now you can click and drag this point around, and it will remain fixed to the point that you initially placed your pen tool down on. And if you decide you want to move it again, you hold the space bar, and you can shift and move this around to any other location on the board. But we'll place it back here. And the same thing goes for any other point that you decide to put down on your art piece. You can hit the space bar, move it around, change the location to wherever you want it to go. Now, in addition to that, you can also hit the shift key when you're placing a point and or 45-degree angles. Now, you can also hold the shift key down when you are using the space bar, and as you do it, it will then lock it to the position that you're at. Releasing the shift key will allow it to move again. Holding it will lock it to that place, and then you can shift and change these around, as well as hitting the Alt key while holding it will lock the actual handle and will allow you to move that at 45-degree angles. Or if you want, what you can actually do is you can release the shift key, and then you can just hold the Alt key down, and then you can change the angle to whatever precise angle you want, as well as the distance for that angle in terms of the actual handle itself. So we can change the angle of the handle freely, not at set increments using the Alt key only, or at 45-degree angles using the Shift key along with the Alt key. Or if we release Shift and Alt, we can just move it using the spacebar. Okay, so these are techniques and tips that you're going to want to become familiar with and learn how to use when you are using the actual pen tool. These allow you to move freely without constantly having to undo and or delete objects that are on your artboard when you start developing your artwork. Now we can start to utilize what we've learned in terms of developing our piece a little bit further and learning how to utilize the pen tool and making this art, at least the line work for this art, come to life. I'm actually going to stop the tutorial here, and I'm going to let you guys sit with this. If you're not familiar with it, you can play around with it, get used to it. The best way to do it is to practice it. Perfect practice makes perfect. So make sure you're following everything that I told you to the T, so that way you don't have to question yourself later. One of the biggest things is making sure, as we spoke of in the beginning of this, is that there is fluidity in terms of your drawing. So you're going to notice that the pen tool can be a static tool, but if you learn how to manipulate it correctly, you can get any line or any representation of your artwork that you're looking for. So in our next segment, I will move on from the basic functions and the quick to do manipulations into uh, setting up variations for your strokes so that way it looks a little different. And that way you can get different outcomes when you start working with your artwork. So thank you guys for joining me again for another Adobe Illustrator tutorial. I'm the One Will Focus. You can catch me online, theonewillfocus.com. You can check out my store where I have artwork and prints available, as well as on all social media, specifically Instagram if you want to keep up to date with some of the new sketches and things that I release, like the one that you see on the screen, at the One Will Focus. All of my contact information will be listed at the bottom of the screen. Be sure to drop a comment. If you're interested in learning anything new, make sure that you let me know so that way I can do a video for you guys and make sure it's out there for you, okay? Thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next section. The One Will Focus.